not really have a place in the military, despite what anybody tells you. It's just not something that gets discussed. Now, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was in the Navy for 7 years. 5 of those years were spent on a SEAL team, and maybe because we were in such small teams, people had to put up with my weirdness and my interest in, the strange happenings around the world. But, really that was an anomaly. And I think it comes from the culture inside the military where you have a group of people that has such a intense job that's so rooted on practical approaches to problem solving. There is no time to be theorizing about how demons and ghosts and things that are out of this world are having an impact, because we need to focus on what's happening right now in front of us. There's no space for anything else. And so when you do hear stories coming out of the military that are paranormal in nature, it isn't that you should inherently believe them.
This is a paranormal event in Afghanistan, mainly in the Helmand province area. And that's where, a lot of the British fought at. If you were either a volunteer in the British military as an American or whatever, this is what this guy is talking about. It's a long video. I don't know if we'll be able to get to the end of it, but people tend to wonder why I talk about the grave digger, and this story will kind of explain it. But it's in the Helmand area where the most losses ever suffered were in this area. The most losses suffered from the British, which you have to understand there was American volunteers inside with that. There was Filipino volunteers within that. There was Chinese volunteers within that. The British were one of the first ones to decide, well, let's go in off foot with our boots. Same, with the Russians. Americans are always kind of the last ones to go in there and clean it up and try to make sense of stuff. But they're not that intelligent. That's why they're not good at hunting. They're good at doing slaughterhouses. If you were good at hunting, you would be able to track the blood back in the right direction. I'm not going to trust a blood splatter expert. I'm going to trust a hunter that knows how to do tracking skills.
But rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to share a military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when 8 U.S. Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation post in the middle of Helmand province. And some very strange things happened out there that the Marines that were there believe are still plaguing them to this day. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to play Ding Dong Dit.
Let's see where this ends up at. Oh, it took me to an ad because I tried to skip through something. Can't cut corners.
Department of Health, and they told me we're in the process of planning for mobile vaccination clinics and pop-up clinics.
We got double ads.
New Crest Pro Health Complete Protection kills 99% of plaque bacteria. Plus, it gives you 24-hour plaque.
8 mobile vaccination units and drop teams that can bring vaccinations to those who can't travel.
Should give me a discount on Crest for watching that ad.
You what?
That's right, and that plan in Pierce County is still in the works. So we'd love to hear your questions. Send them to
You
us.
have the higher ground and you can see what's going on around you. And so as a result, OPs become prime targets.
So now he's going to start explaining it. It's, Opericus,
June
the
of
British.
2009, U.S. and NATO forces
In Helmand.
surged into Afghanistan. Troop numbers escalated dramatically in preparation for this massive offensive against the Taliban. During this surge, a very small team of Marines, 8 Marines, were given a mission to go to an observation post in Helmand province where a group of British soldiers were stationed at the time. An observation post, or OP as it's called in the military, is any location where you're able to observe. Hence the name. Most OPs, if not all OPs, are located on high ground because that provides the best view. OPs are very strategically valuable. You have the higher ground and you can see what's going on.
If they're done
And
right.
so as a result, OPs become prime targets for attack. Now, the OP that these Marines were going to, OP Rock, was a little bit unique. It was strategically very important, but it didn't really have the higher ground. All around it were other large pieces of terrain, which meant if you poke your head up for too long, you might get shot from a sniper on the mountain. And so OP Rock was a very dangerous and isolated place to be. Not to mention, laughably small and had almost no amenities. It was basically a couple of Hesco barriers, those big brown squares that get filled with sand and dirt to stop bullets, and then, not even cots. They slept literally on the ground on sleeping pads and a couple of ghillie tents overhead. That was about it. And so these Marines were going to be there for 60 days.
It's not very long.
They were just isolated and stuck on this tiny little wasteland in the middle of Afghanistan. The 8 Marines were led by Sergeant Green.
It's not long enough for your mind to play tricks on you.
The other 6 junior Marines were Zolik, Hoyt, Wilson, Parker, Smith.
These are all.
After driving their
One of my U.S. American family members would be Wilson. That's his last name, Wilson. I'm not sure if that's who he's referring to or not. I'm not sure how old this video is. We could check real quick. This video was uploaded 5 months ago.
Vehicles all the way through the snaking pass that get to OP Rock, and the British soldiers are there anxiously waiting for them. Normally, anytime you turn over with any other unit, you do something called turnover operations, where, because you're new to the area, you want to go out and do like a presence patrol or something to get a feel for the area with the people who have been there.
You already know what's out there. It's full of enemies, so you don't need to discuss it. If I need to discuss it, you're probably not smart enough to survive this position anyways.
Kind of give you a lay of the land and say, hey, look out for this area, we think there's IEDs over there. Remember, if you're over here, you're in plain sight of the enemy, they can shoot you. But when they got there, the British were so anxious to leave, they did not do turnover ops. The British just looked totally weathered and beaten down and ragged, like they'd been fighting at OP Rock for decades. They'd only been there for 60 days, the same amount of time that these Marines are about to leave. And before they leave, one of the British soldiers turns and says, hey, just so you know, if you dig anything up here, just put it back. And the Marines look at him like, what are you talking about? And he doesn't elaborate. He just says again, if you dig anything up, just put it back. Trust me. So that night, the men have settled into their new home for the next 60 days. And the way it works on any base in the world, but certainly in a war zone, is there's always someone manning a guard post. And so the first night, it happened to be Corporal Lena's turn to be on watch. Corporal Lena is the second in command of these 8 Marines. And he was up in the guard tower. And you got to put yourself in his mind, okay? Even if you've never been to Afghanistan, just imagine being out in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a mountainous desert with no village, no people, no anything. But at the same time, you are hanging it out there. You are totally exposed. There are people in the mountains around you that want to kill you, for sure. And it's you and 7 other sleeping people, right, in your little tiny OP. All you got is a radio where you can call back to your main base.
Now I know you're wondering, why do you only have one person on the job while the rest are sleeping? Because it's better if I'm the one that's tired and I can see people coming. Because when you're tired, your mind plays tricks on you. So you see things that aren't there, but you also see everything that is there. So you're more aware just because you're more paranoid. And the other guys get to sleep, so they're not sleep deprived. So it leaves your soldiers in a better way to fight. Sleep deprivation is the #1 cause of death. Sleep is the cause of death, or the cousin of death.
It's far enough away that if something bad happens, you better hope that one, you can get through to them, and two, they can get over here as quickly as they can. And the great fear when you're in these remote locations is that you're going to get ambushed. There's so many stories about these complex attacks being launched on these small little outfits.
I'm in the middle of making a video.
Where all of a sudden, groups like these 8 Marines just get totally overrun by the Taliban. So it's a terrifying thing. When I was in Afghanistan, I didn't stand all that much guard duty, but when I did, you're up in the shack and you're kind of looking out into this like vast expanse of nothingness, and you're wondering, like, are people watching me right now? You know, is someone taking aim at me right now? I mean, you're protected and you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, but nighttime in Afghanistan, standing guard duty, it's very eerie. And so this first night, Lena is up there, it's very quiet, and his radio that's right next to him, like imagine like a big walkie-talkie, like military-grade radio, it starts crackling. Military radios, at least American military radios, are from the 1950s, and they've basically not changed. Very durable, and they work, but it's not uncommon for them to falter, and that's why we have people that specialize in just radios that can fix these things for us. Because if you lose your line of communication, you're screwed. And so he's sitting there, and he starts hearing crackling on the radio, and so he notices it, but he doesn't think much of it, and the crackling stops.
You know, these people think you must have money on
I'm in the middle of making a video. I'm doing something making a video.
Then the crackling picks up again, and he thinks he can hear someone speaking in the radio. It didn't sound like English. It didn't sound like even words necessarily, but it was a little bit louder. Now he's really paying attention. Because he was worried his radio might be going bad, he first took the battery off, looked at it, blew it off, reconnected the battery.
See, most of y'all that haven't been in the military don't understand that. Usually something coming through that radio, 95% of the time, it's bad. It's either bad for somebody else, which is going to get bad for you, or so on and so on. And so that's why he's expressing this. It's weird that it's coming through the radio and we can't understand what's going on.
He rebooted it and put it back down, and he's a little more keyed into his radio. And then a couple minutes later, he hears this crackling, and now he can clearly hear someone's voice. And it sounds like Russian.
I don't want it there.
Speaking in Russian. This is an encrypted radio. You're not picking up random signals all over the place. You only are picking up people that have your crypto. And it doesn't make any sense to pick up somebody else's voice. This has to be someone on your team. And so he thinks, okay, I'll check in with the main base, because my guys are all asleep right now. They're all sleeping right there, 7 of them. There's no beds. They're laying on the ground right there.
What does that mean?
On the radio. So he picks up the radio and he calls them.
What?
What does that mean?
I am in the middle of making a video. So I'm not talking to you. If you want to watch the video later, you could figure out what I'm talking about.
Into the main base, and he says, hey, is anybody pushing traffic out this way?
You're ruining
And
it.
like right away, they get a response from the main base that says, no, we're not pushing or receiving. Lena's not terrified about this, but he's like, okay, there's something going on with the radio. The crackling and gurgling and weird sounds would persist throughout the night, to the point where the next morning, when the next guard came on duty, he said, hey, I think there's something strange going on with the radio.
I have my box set up the way it needs to be.
You should probably go switch it out and get somebody else's radio while you're up here. Lena's relieved of guard duty, and he goes down to check on the other Marines. And at this point, everybody's awake, and it's the start of their first full day at OP Rock.
I'll be honest with y'all, I don't like how long this video is to get to the point. But once you get to the point, you'll understand. That joke of back to the boneyard for you, pal, that's not so funny to certain individuals.
And because they have nothing else to do besides defend it, they start taking stock of how well fortified is it, what are some ways that we can improve this place. And they notice that there's a trench dug around the inside of OP Rock, basically right up against the Hesperus, that allows anyone to stand and not be jutting out of the OP and run the risk of getting shot by a sniper. And they're looking at it and they're thinking to themselves, it's not deep enough. It's maybe a couple feet down. You're certainly not going to be able to stand on this trench. You'll totally be exposed. And they thought, why didn't the British, who were here for 60 days, Why didn't they dig a deeper trench? And so Lena and the rest of the Marines decide.
Now, this is about the U.S. Marines. The video that I showed you was about the British Marines that was turning this camp over to the Americans. And let me tell you, the British walked out of there alive.
They're going to spend that day digging the trench a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. As they're digging, Lena hits something metal in the trench. And he pulls it out, and it's like this metal stake, like an engineering stake. And he brushes off the dirt on the stake, and he's looking at it, and he can see some foreign writing, and it looks like Russian writing. And he's thinking to himself, oh, that's not that weird. Back in the 80s, the Russians were here. It's totally possible that they may have left some of their gear here and it got buried. About 10 meters away from Lena is one of the younger Marines named Wilson, who's digging, and at some point he hits the ground and like a pot in the soil opens up. And he sees there's some pottery and some pieces of what look like ceramics that are inside of this bowl. And after pulling out some of the plates and pots, they pull out a huge human bone, a femur, the leg bone. They ultimately decide to tuck the leg bone back into where it was, and they stop digging in that area, and they continue to dig in the other sections of the trench. But they couldn't dig more than a couple inches before running into more human remains. And by the end of the day, they had unearthed dozens of skeletons inside of this trench. And so they realized that this is probably what the British meant when they said, if you dig something up, put it out. A couple of weeks go by, and the Marines at this point have accepted that they live in a very creepy place. And on day 13 of being in Iraq, Hoyt, who had just turned 20 years old, is up on guard duty. As he's sitting there, he starts getting this really uncomfortable feeling that someone is right behind him. And so at one point, he turns around to look at what's behind him, basically looking back into the camp itself. And now, coming from outside the wire where he had just been looking, he hears this horrible, blood-curdling scream. He turns around, and he's looking out. He's got his night vision goggles on. He's looking around for anything. And all of a sudden, a couple of hundred meters away, he sees a man running between one bush to another bush.
And this goes back into my other explanation, kind of. It's the first time I'm watching, well, it's not the first time I'm watching the video, but it's the first time I'm watching it with y'all. I just watched it, and then I decided I was going to have a conversation with y'all. To a mother, screaming kids are the most annoying thing ever, and I could totally understand that. You got to deal with the screaming the whole time. But to a Marine or special ops or any kind of agent of any kind of source out there that sees screaming leads to somebody's death rather than somebody's enjoyment. When you come back home and you hear your kids screaming in happiness, it's that same reflection of seeing somebody cry from sadness and then seeing them cry from happiness. Okay? Your worst nightmare is the most beautiful sound to me.
Now they know that at any time they could get attacked, so they're not thinking that this could be anything other than the Taliban coming to attack them. And so the other Marines have jumped up because they heard the scream, and they're looking to Hoyt to be like, what's going on? Hoyt is saying to them, I got a guy, he's about 200 meters away, I just saw him running right to left. Lena runs over to the edge of the Hesco, he raises his rifle with a thermal imager on it, he's looking out, and there's no heat signature out there. It's totally cold. There's no animals, there's no people, certainly, there's nothing. And Lena is yelling to Hoyt, where is he? Where do I need to look? And Hoyt's saying, he's right there. I just saw him go behind that bush. But Lena is looking out, and he can't see anything on thermal. And he's like, I don't see anything. There's no one out there. The Marines also had a dog
There should be
that they
two.
inherited from the British soldiers that had been there. Her name was Ugly Betty. They loved Ugly Betty. They took care of her, and she was apparently really good at identifying
Lords of
when
Dogtown,
people
bro.
went towards the OP, so she was a great watchdog. And this whole time, she had been looking in the same direction that Hoyt had seen this figure, and she's barking like a maniac. And even after they're looking with thermal and they can't see anyone out there, they can't get Betty to calm down.
And you know your dog. You know when there's something wrong with your dog. When your dog's just barking at something like, hey, I know you're not really a threat, but don't become one. And then when your dog's like, that's a fucking threat, and it's a threat because I'm not a threat to that person. You know the difference in your dog's bark. You just do. When you know your dog, you know the difference in your dog's bark. Just like when you're talking to somebody, telepathically wise, you know whether your girlfriend's actually okay or not when she says, yeah, I'm fine.
Completely transfixed on the area where Hoyt had seen this figure. So for the rest of the night,
We trust nobody but our dogs.
anticipating at any moment that they're going to get attacked. Someone's going to take a shot, they're going to throw a grenade in, because we lost this guy right there in front of us. So eventually, the next day, when they didn't get attacked, they just kind of said,
That's why I like a defiant dog. One that's like, you're wrong, it's this way. I know, it looks like it's that way, but it's this way. Trust me. I've not necessarily cut the corners, but I see the corner that they cut, and the straightest point to the object is this way. Many times 99.9% of the time your dog is right, and you can't prove it that is 100% of the time because one time you make a mistake.
okay, and they moved on. Just figured it was an anomaly. Another couple of weeks later, on day 26, Zolik, who's another one of the younger Marines, was on guard duty and was really hot. He remembers even taking his helmet off because he was sweating so bad. And then at some point, while he's just looking out into the vast open nothingness, he said that the temperature dropped inside of the shack dramatically. So much so that he actually felt cold. There was no breeze, there was no reason for it to be getting cold. And as he's thinking to himself, like, is there a storm coming in or a cold front coming in? He starts feeling like someone's standing behind him, looking over his shoulder, and no one's there. He's in this tiny little shack. And he's feeling creeped out, and all of a sudden he starts hearing whispering from behind him. Not on the radio, but like in the shack with him. And he keeps turning around, and he keeps thinking, like, am I hearing things? Am I losing my mind? He starts hearing footsteps on the roof of his shack. And that's when he thinks, oh, Smith, who was the kind of class clown of the movie, was playing a joke. He must be whispering outside, and then he climbed up on top. And he
Dog's barking.
So he jumps out of the shack and looks up, expecting to see Smith standing on the roof of the guard shack. But no one's on the guard shack. At this point, Zolik's pretty spooked. He does a quick search on either side of the guard shack, thinking maybe Smith is there, but no one's there. And then he turns around and, of course, sees that the other 7 Marines are all asleep. So it wasn't Smith, it wasn't any of his teammates. At this point, he goes back in the shack and he raises his rifle and he's looking through his thermal scope. So any human would light up like a Christmas tree if you saw them on a thermal. And he's scanning outside all around, thinking, did I hear someone who's out there? Because they had that weird run-in 2 weeks earlier with that random person that they could never find. He's thinking maybe there's somebody else out there. And as he's scanning, he sees a man standing a couple hundred meters away with his fist raised like this. Zolik was so caught off guard from the way he was standing that he actually lowered his rifle to look because the moon was pretty bright, the illumination was pretty big. And he looked, he couldn't really see him again, so he brought his rifle back up, and now through his rifle the figure was gone. Zolik in interviews has admitted that he was really stressed out about being at a recon. He was really down. I think of all the Marines there, he was depressed. He did not want to be there. He felt like he was experiencing real combat fatigue. And he thought at this moment that he's losing his mind. Between the whispering and the footsteps on the roof and seeing this person with his fist raised. And so instead of telling people that he had potentially just seen this person out along the perimeter of the OP, he started to convince himself that you're just losing your mind. You're stressed and you're hallucinating. You just got to calm down. For the rest of the night, he would not see the figure on his thermal or anybody out there, but he would hear whispering behind him. He kept hearing footsteps on the roof, but he would go out and no one would be there. So by the time the sun came up, he really thought that he was kind of losing his mind. So he went to his leadership, Sergeant Green and Corporal Lena, and he told them about what had happened the night before, about seeing the figure that had disappeared and hearing these whispers and footsteps. I mean, he really thought that he was losing it, and he requested to be transferred. And they granted it to him. And the other 7 Marines were really upset about that. They felt like he was kind of abandoning them, and they were really critical of the reason for him leaving. They were like, oh, you're just playing the crazy card. You're just making that up so you can leave this crappy place that we don't want to be here either. So they were not taking seriously what he claimed happened. They just believed he was using the crazy card to get out of being an OP. Just a couple of days after Zolik's departure, Lena is on guard duty in that guard shack, and as he's looking out, Ugly Betty starts barking really aggressively towards the area that Lena is looking at. So he raises his night vision goggles and is scanning the mountainside looking for any sign of people that perhaps Ugly Betty has sensed. And he stops when he sees what he believes is a Taliban scout scouts standing on the mountainside. He's pretty far away, a few hundred meters away. He switches to his thermal scope to confirm that it's a person before he engages. And when he raises his thermal scope, there's nobody there. There's no heat signature anywhere. But Ugly Betty is still barking like a maniac in the direction of where this potential scout was standing. And so Lena goes back to his night vision goggles like a second later, and he's looking.
They got a lot
sees
of
the same scout now about
They got a lot of tunnels and stuff like that, so you could drop below the Earth's crust. And that Earth's crust, it's hard for you to really see how far down somebody really is when the temperature of that Earth helps drop your body temperature also. You're not thinking about looking under the Earth, you're thinking about looking on top of it.
100 meters closer to him, way closer to him. Like, impossible to cover that distance in that amount of time. He practically falls over when he sees it. He switches to his thermal and he's getting ready to engage, but there's nothing there. And this is all happening in a matter of seconds. He goes back to his NVGs and he's looking and there's nothing there. And as he's about to go to his thermal for one last look, he feels a tap on his shoulder, which he believes is going to be one of the other Marines that must have heard him frantically moving around the guard shack. And when he turns, there's no one there. There's no one anywhere near the shack. All 7 are asleep in the middle of the camp. At this point, Lena felt bad because he was critical of Zolik, who had left because he had heard voices and seen apparitions out in the distance. And here's Lena, the second in command of the group, having the exact same experience. But over the next 10 days, Hoyt, Smith, and Wilson would all have very similar experiences in that guard shack. And after a while, they all began sharing their stories, and they all realized that Zolik probably wasn't lying, and we were unfair to be critical of him because
Told you there was a spiritual curse
then on day 59,
that I put on that
the day
place
before they're scheduled to leave,
and my
all of their
fallen
radios
heroes.
get hit, all of them. And Lena goes over to Gibbs, who is their comms guy, and he's like, "What's going on?" And Gibbs was like, "I've been working on the radios this whole time we're here. I've changed nothing. They've always worked." Now, they did have a satellite phone, but it was an unreliable way to get in touch with reinforcements if you needed it. They're pretty much isolated at this point, and they're all just sitting there, just hoping they can get through one more night without any problems. Wilson is the one actually in the guard shack, and then all of a sudden, machine gun fire opens up right outside of their base. And Wilson is totally caught off guard. He has no idea where it's coming from. He's trying to call it out to the guys where they're getting shot from. And all the other Marines are scrambling to the walls. They're taking cover behind the Hescos. And as they're laying there, Lena runs up into the guard shack with Wilson. He's like, he grabs him and he's like, "Where are they shooting us from?" And Wilson's like, "I have no idea." And it's like, it's so loud. There's all this gunfire coming in at them. And as Lena and Wilson are trying to figure out,
Told you it's the weirdest shit I ever saw
they
over
hear the
there.
distinctive sound of an RPG being fired at them. It's a rocket-propelled grenade. It's like a whistling sound, and they know it's going to hit them at any moment. The two of them brace for impact, and they hear the sound of this RPG smashing inside of the OP, and the machine gun fire is just continuing. It's a non-stop. And so a couple of the other younger Marines basically low-crawled their way into the trench where they were protected from these rounds, and they're thinking, like, we got to make sure no one's in the trenches. And so they start clearing the trenches, but no one's in the trench. And it's just this constant barrage of gunfire. They have no idea where it's coming from. And then just as suddenly as it started, the gunfire stops and it's silent. As soon as the shooting stopped, the Marines did not just poke their head up and say everything's fine now. If you're being shot at, you assume that even if there's a break in the gunfire, they're going to start shooting at you again. And so for
Taking
hours,
aim.
they're just like waiting for the next round of fire to start, but they don't even know where it's coming from. And they're kind of isolated and exposed, so they're all just kind of like hunkered down against the Hescos, waiting to respond to the next volley of fire. But it never comes. And when the sun comes up, they're able to take stock of the damage to their OP from all the machine gun fire and from the rocket-propelled grenade. But there's no damage. No one had ever been shooting at the OP. There was no damage. So they
Nothing happened. If anybody knows who the Gravedigger is, you realize that the mountain on the side of the Gravedigger is Mount St. Helens. And that was the biggest, baddest explosion that had ever rocked the United States. Hiroshima and Nagasaki didn't even experience a blow to the standards that we did, and it was multiple explosions. And that's the reason why Gravedigger is the way it is driven and written. It's the boneyard.
I never gave up. I just knew. I always saw beyond the situation.
Grave who?
That's my state.
Grave digger? Who's that?
All right. It's time for the digger.
The bone. Bang. Cyclone. Living la vida loca with my monta. But ti amo. Ti mas noho. Amputo. This is Tacoma, Seattle. Tecumseh. Tecumseh. They call it SeaTac, just like Iceland and Greenland. Iceland is green, Greenland is full of ice. It's Pig Latin. SeaTac stands for Tecumseh, which is me. Don't ever fuck with my spirituality. I don't care what God you believe in. You have to believe in all the gods and all the reasoning. Chinese are trying to tell you that they created Buddhism. Thieving bastards. It's the Indian. fuck that motherfucking shit up. I wish they played this loud enough to where I would want to cover my ears with my earbuds on. Ah. This is the dopest part to me, like when he just rips through his whole fucking outside and you see the inside and you're like, that's why that motherfucker be rolling. How his cage is built. Motherfucker that knows how to run his cage. Just like a fucking cellmate. Equality. Now I am a Sherman kid because I was kidnapped. They replaced Tecumseh as my middle name. I told you that, and they labeled me as American. So, do I give a fuck about an American? Fuck no. Fuck no. But do I give a fuck about a Confederate American? No. Do I care about a Native American? No. If you got American attachment? No. I don't care about you. You are the enemy. Not because I made you one, but because you decided to be an enemy. So, this car...
Wait, are you being serious? There's no way.
Maybe it's a joke. There's a joke inside the bag.
We invited food reviewers to try
It's
the Whoppers,
mine.
but with a special surprise.
$5
And so is the
for
tank.
2 Whopper sandwiches.
I'm gonna leave before you change your mind.
All of them.
Deal hard to believe. Get the Whopper and the 2 for $5 mix and match. Your way, way better.
Because the destruction of the tank itself, destroying the tank, has kept me alive. Not the fact that Nazism has kept me alive, but the fact that because my own family has hurt me, not the Tecumseh side, but the Sherman side,
He's entertained millions of fans worldwide.
has helped me.
He's crushed over 6 tons of cars at count.
So we take this and we fucking paint the top black. Or we just fucking make it British. But this motherfucking car is my motherfucking car. Good morning. It's all gathered around. Spoke up. The leaves went alone. Everybody leaves. I was bad to the bone.
Bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad. Bad to the bone. Broke 1,000 hearts.
And 1,000 laws. I don't give a fuck, bitch. They ain't considered no flaws. They ain't constitutional rights. Gonna try to take them away, bitch. It's gonna be a fight. You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die. Next time they fucking find these nut bones, the only thing they're flying. We met the queen halfway. You understand what I'm saying? I'm bad to the bone. Catch my drift. We're reaching new heights, new levels. Maintaining the righteous road of life. Everybody knows the Union soldiers used Americans as enslaved fighters since they wanted to play dirty work.
Now when I walk the streets, kings and queens step aside. Every woman I meet,
I know I'm bringing the tobacco over though.
I wanna tell you,
Bring the
pretty
tobacco
baby,
over.
what I see, I make my own. And I'm here to
Bring the
tell you,
tobacco over.
I heard you.
Oh, you didn't say nothing.
bad to the bone.
It's the only one the cops don't want to catch. It's God in disguise while the devil wants to live with lies.
The man owns 5 car dealerships. How'd the lady crap and consummate? You know, most mothers would say, wait.